Atlanta, March 22nd, 1976. Elvis was in the middle of Can't Help Falling in Love when he noticed a little girl in the front row sobbing uncontrollably. As security moved to remove what they thought was a disruptive child, Elvis stopped the entire concert and walked to the edge of the stage. What he discovered about 8-year-old Rebecca Martinez would lead to the most heart-wrenching duet in rock and roll history. This story reveals the night when Elvis Presley proved that the greatest performers don't just entertain, they heal. It's about the moment when a superstar recognized that sometimes a single person in the audience needs more than a song. They need to be seen, heard, and loved. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy Stories, because these are the moments that show us what true compassion looks like in action. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that even in our darkest moments, there's always someone who cares enough to notice our pain. March 22nd, 1976. The Fox Theater in Atlanta was packed with 4,600 screaming fans, all eager to see the king of rock and roll perform in one of the South's most prestigious venues. The elegant theater, with its ornate Middle Eastern architecture and perfect acoustics, provided an intimate setting that was very different from Elvis's usual massive arena shows. Tonight felt special from the moment Elvis walked on stage, his white jumpsuit catching the theatrical lights as he opened with C.C. Rider. The audience was electric, responding to every gesture, every note, every smile. Elvis was in prime form, his voice strong and his stage presence commanding every eye in the beautiful theater. But as he moved into the softer portion of his set, preparing to sing Can't Help Falling in Love, something in the front row caught his attention. There in seat A12 sat a small girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. While everyone around her was singing and clapping, she was crying, not the happy tears of an overwhelmed fan, but deep, heartbroken sobs that shook her tiny frame. Her mother, a woman in her 30s, was trying desperately to comfort her, but nothing seemed to help. Elvis began the opening notes of Can't Help Falling in Love, but his eyes kept drifting back to the crying child. As he sang the familiar lyrics, he could see security guards beginning to move toward the little girl, obviously considering her a disruption that needed to be addressed. That's when Elvis made a decision that would transform an ordinary concert into something extraordinary. He stopped singing mid-verse, holding up his hand to halt the band. The theater fell silent, 4,600 people wondering what was happening. Elvis walked to the very edge of the stage, his voice gentle as he spoke into the microphone. "Hold on there, folks," Elvis said, his southern drawl more pronounced than usual. "I see a little lady down here who seems to be having a hard time, and we can't have that, can we?" The spotlight found the little girl, and the entire theater could see her tear-stained face and the way she clung to her mother. Instead of being embarrassed by the attention, the child looked up at Elvis with such raw pain in her eyes that it took his breath away. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Elvis asked, kneeling at the edge of the stage to bring himself closer to her level. The little girl's mother encouraged her to speak, and in a voice barely audible even with the theater's perfect acoustics, she whispered, "Rebecca Martinez." "Rebecca Martinez," Elvis repeated, his voice full of warmth. "That's a beautiful name for a beautiful little girl. Can you tell me why you're so sad tonight, Rebecca?" What happened next stunned the entire audience. Through her tears, Rebecca began to speak, and her story unfolded in a way that left everyone in the theater hanging on every word. "My daddy was supposed to bring me to see you," Rebecca said, her voice growing slightly stronger as Elvis listened intently. "He promised me for my birthday that we would come to your concert together, but last week he had to go to heaven and Mama brought me instead because she said, 'Daddy would want me to still hear you sing.'" The revelation hit Elvis like a physical blow. This wasn't just a sad child. This was a little girl mourning her father, trying to honor a promise he could no longer keep. Elvis felt his own throat tighten as he processed the weight of what she'd shared. "Oh, honey," Elvis said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry about your daddy. That must hurt something awful." Rebecca nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I miss him so much. He used to sing your songs to me when I couldn't sleep. Love Me Tender was our special song. The theater was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Everyone was riveted by this conversation between the king of rock and roll and a grieving 8-year-old. Elvis looked back at his band, then at the audience, making a decision that went against every protocol and profession professional consideration. "Rebecca," Elvis said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be brave for me. Would you like to come up here on stage and sing Love Me Tender with me? We can sing it for your daddy together." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that the audience gasped. Rebecca looked up at Elvis with wonder, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You want me to sing with you?" she asked. "I'd be honored to sing with you, darling," Elvis replied. "I think your daddy would like that, don't you?" Rebecca looked at her mother, who was crying as hard as her daughter, but nodding encouragingly. "Go ahead, Mija," she whispered. "Daddy would love this." Security helped Rebecca make her way to the stage, and Elvis personally lifted her up, setting her gently beside him. She was tiny next to his imposing figure, wearing a simple yellow dress and clutching a small stuffed elephant that Elvis later learned had been a gift from her father. "This is my friend Rebecca," Elvis announced to the audience. "She's going to help me sing a very special song tonight. Let's all listen real quiet and give her some love." Elvis sat down at the piano, pulling Rebecca close so she could reach the microphone. As he began playing the opening chords of Love Me Tender, something magical began to happen in that theater. Rebecca's voice, small and sweet, joined Elvis's rich baritone in a duet that transcended every boundary between performer and audience, adult and child, superstar and ordinary person. Her voice carried all the love she felt for her father, all the pain of losing him, and all the hope that somehow, somewhere, he could hear her singing their special song. "Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go," they sang together, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Elvis's usually powerful voice became gentle, supportive, creating a safe space for Rebecca's smaller voice to shine through. As they sang, Elvis could feel the little girl beginning to relax. Her tears were still falling, but they had changed from tears of pure grief to tears of healing. In the spotlight, surrounded by thousands of strangers, she had found a moment of connection with her lost father through the song they had shared. The audience was completely captivated. Tough men were crying openly. Mothers held their own children tighter. Everyone in that theater understood they were witnessing something sacred, not a performance, but a healing ritual, a moment when music served its highest purpose. When the song ended, the applause was unlike anything Elvis had ever experienced. It wasn't the wild cheering of excited fans, but the gentle, reverent applause of people who had been moved to their very core. Rebecca looked out at the audience with wonder, still not quite believing where she was or what had just happened. But Elvis wasn't finished. He had one more gift for this brave little girl. "Rebecca," he said, removing the silk scarf from around his neck, one of his most iconic accessories that fans fought to catch at every show. "I want you to have this. Not because you're sad, but because you're brave. It takes courage to share your heart with all these people, and I want you to remember that your daddy would be so proud of how strong you are." He draped the scarf around her tiny shoulders, and Rebecca clutched it like the treasure it was. "Thank you, Mr. Elvis," she whispered, and then, in a gesture that melted every heart in the theater, she stood on her tiptoes and gave him a kiss on the cheek. Elvis walked Rebecca back to her seat personally, making sure she was comfortable before returning to the stage. But the concert had been forever changed by those few minutes. Every song Elvis sang afterward seemed to carry more weight, more meaning, more connection to the human experience. During his final song, "Can't Help Falling in Love," the same song that had been interrupted by Rebecca's tears, Elvis looked directly at her as he sang. This time she wasn't crying. She was smiling, wearing his scarf like a cape, and singing along with every word. After the show, Elvis did something else unprecedented. He invited Rebecca and her mother, Maria Martinez, backstage for a private conversation. What transpired in his dressing room that night remained mostly private, but those who were present reported that Elvis spent nearly an hour talking with Rebecca about her father, about loss, and about how music could help heal even the deepest wounds. Elvis learned that Rebecca's father, Carlos Martinez, had been a construction worker who had saved for months to buy tickets to the Elvis concert as a special birthday surprise for his daughter. He had been killed in an industrial accident just 1 week before the show, leaving behind a wife and 3 children, with Rebecca being the youngest. The backstage conversation revealed even more heartbreaking details. Carlos had been working double shifts at a construction site in downtown Atlanta, trying to save money not just for the concert tickets, but for Rebecca's upcoming birthday party. He had planned to make it the best birthday she'd ever had, complete with an Elvis-themed celebration that would have included decorations, an Elvis impersonator, and culminated culminating with the real concert. He had it all planned out, Maria told Elvis through her tears. Carlos bought a little Elvis costume for Rebecca to wear to the party. He'd been practicing singing "Love Me Tender" so he could perform it for her. He even bought a toy microphone so they could sing together. When he died, I didn't know what to do with all those party supplies. I almost threw them away. Elvis listened intently, his own eyes filling with tears as he understood the full scope of what this family had lost. "What did you do with them?" he asked gently. "They're still in boxes in our garage," Maria admitted. "I couldn't bear to look at them, but I couldn't throw them away either. They were the last things he bought before the accident." That's when Elvis made a decision that would become one of the most touching gestures of his career. "Maria, would it be all right if I came to visit you and Rebecca tomorrow? I'd like to see those party supplies, and maybe we could have that birthday party Carlos planned." The offer was so unexpected that Maria could barely speak. You want to come to our house?" "If you'll have me," Elvis said simply. "I think Carlos would want his little girl to have that party, and I'd be honored to help make it happen." The next afternoon, Elvis Presley arrived at the modest Martinez family home in a working-class neighborhood of Atlanta. He came not in a limousine or with an entourage, but driving a simple rental car, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt. The only thing that betrayed his identity was the unmistakable voice that called hello as he knocked on the front door. The neighborhood buzzed with excitement as word spread that the king of rock and roll was visiting the Martinez family. Children and adults alike gathered on the sidewalk, maintaining a respectful distance but unable to contain their curiosity and excitement. Inside the house, Elvis helped Maria and Rebecca transform their living room using the decorations Carlos had bought. There were gold and blue streamers, balloons shaped like musical notes, and a banner that read "Happy Birthday, Rebecca" in Carlos's careful handwriting. But the most touching moment came when Rebecca showed Elvis the toy microphone her father had bought for their planned duet. It was a simple plastic toy, nothing like the professional equipment Elvis was used to, but he held it with the reverence of a sacred object. "This is perfect," Elvis told Rebecca. "Your daddy had excellent taste in microphones." They spent the afternoon having the birthday party Carlos had planned. Elvis sang "Love Me Tender" using the toy microphone, and Rebecca joined in, her sweet voice blending with his in the intimate setting of her family living room. Neighbors who had gathered outside reported later that they could hear the music and laughter coming from the house, and many said it was the most beautiful concert Elvis had ever given. Elvis also met Rebecca's two older brothers, 12-year-old Miguel and 10-year-old David, who had been struggling with their father's death in their own ways. Miguel had become withdrawn and angry, while David had started having nightmares. Elvis spent time with each boy individually, talking to them about loss, about being strong for their mother and sister, and about how their father lived on in their memories and actions. "Your daddy was a hero," Elvis told the boys as they sat together on the front porch. "He worked hard every day to take care of his family, and he taught you boys how to be good men. Now it's your job to help take care of your mama and your sister, just like he would have wanted." The visit had a profound impact on the entire Martinez family. Miguel began coming out of his shell, taking on more responsibilities around the house and protecting his younger siblings. David's nightmares began to subside, as he found comfort in Elvis's words about his father being proud of him. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was on Rebecca herself. The birthday party her father had planned, brought to life by Elvis's kindness, became a turning point in her grieving process. She began to see her father's death not as abandonment, but as a transition, and she started to believe that he was still watching over her family. Elvis also learned something important that day. As he sat in the Martinez family living room, surrounded by the modest but loving home Carlos had provided for his family, Elvis gained a new perspective on what real success looked like. Here was a man who had worked with his hands, who had struggled to pay bills, who had saved for months to buy concert tickets, yet who had achieved something Elvis was still striving for, a family that felt completely secure in his love. "Carlos was richer than I'll ever be," Elvis told Joe Esposito later that evening. "He had something I'm still looking for, a family that knew beyond any doubt that they were the most important thing in his world." The experience with the Martinez family family influenced Elvis's approach to his own relationships with his family, particularly with his daughter Lisa Marie. He began spending more quality time with her, being more present and attentive, trying to emulate the kind of father Carlos had been to his children. Elvis established a scholarship fund in Carlos Martinez's name, ensuring that all three Martinez children would have their educations paid for from elementary school through college. But beyond the financial support, Elvis maintained a personal relationship with the family that lasted for the rest of his life. He would call on Rebecca's birthday every year, always singing "Love Me Tender" over the phone. When he performed in cities near Atlanta, he would arrange for the Martinez family to attend his concerts, and Rebecca would always receive special recognition. These interactions became some of the most meaningful moments of Elvis's later career. The story of that night in Atlanta and the birthday party that followed spread throughout the music industry and beyond. Other performers began to understand that their relationship with their audience could extend beyond the stage, that they had opportunities to impact individual lives in profound and lasting ways. The Fox Theatre in Atlanta embraced the story as part of their permanent history. They created a small exhibit about that night, including photographs from Rebecca's birthday party and a replica of the toy microphone Carlos had bought for his daughter. The exhibit became one of the most visited displays in the theatre's museum. But the most lasting tribute to that night came from Rebecca herself. As she grew up, she never forgot the lesson. Elvis had taught her about the power of music to heal and connect people. She studied music therapy in college, inspired by the way Elvis had used music to help her process her grief. In her professional work, Rebecca specialized in helping children who had lost parents, using many of the same techniques Elvis had intuitively employed with her. She would often tell her young clients about the night the king of rock and roll stopped his concert to sing with a crying little girl, showing them that even in their darkest moments, someone cared enough to notice their pain. Elvis taught me that music isn't just entertainment, Rebecca would tell her clients. It's a language we use to communicate feelings that are too big for words. When we sing together, we're not alone anymore. Rebecca also established a foundation that provides music therapy, services to grieving families, particularly those who have lost a primary breadwinner to workplace accidents. The foundation, called Carlos's Song, helps families process their grief, while also providing practical support during their time of need. The toy microphone her father bought for her became a cherished family heirloom, passed down to Rebecca's own children. She would tell them the story of their grandfather Carlos, who had planned a perfect birthday party, and of Elvis Presley, who had made sure that party happened even after Carlos was gone. When Elvis died in August 1977, Rebecca Martinez, now 11 years old, was one of the thousands who gathered outside Graceland to mourn. She wore the silk scarf he had given her that night in Atlanta and carried a sign that read, "Thank you for helping me say goodbye to my daddy." At the memorial gathering, Rebecca met other people whose lives had been touched by Elvis's compassion. There was an elderly man whose medical bills Elvis had quietly paid, a single mother whose car Elvis had replaced after it broke down, and dozens of others who had experienced the king's kindness away from the spotlight. "That's when I realized," Rebecca said years later, "that what happened to my family wasn't unique. Elvis was helping people all the time. The difference was that most of those acts of kindness happened privately. Our story became public because it happened during a concert. But Elvis was being that generous and caring all the time. Your daddy sounds like he was a wonderful man," Elvis told Rebecca as she sat in his dressing room, still wearing his scarf. "And you know what? I think he was here tonight. I think he was watching you sing. And I think he was prouder than any daddy has ever been." Maria Martinez later recalled that conversation as the turning point in her daughter's grieving process. Before that night, Rebecca had been inconsolable, she said. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, wouldn't talk about her father. But after singing with Elvis, something changed. She started healing. But the story doesn't end there. Elvis, deeply moved by his encounter with Rebecca, made a decision that would impact the Martinez family for years to come. He established a scholarship fund in Carlos Martinez's name, ensuring that all three Martinez children would have their educations paid for from elementary school through college. He also arranged for the family to receive financial financial support to help them through the difficult transition of losing their primary breadwinner. More personally, Elvis stayed in touch with Rebecca and her family for the rest of his life. He would call on her birthday and at Christmas, always asking about her schoolwork and her dreams. When he performed in cities near Atlanta, he would arrange for the Martinez family to attend his concerts, and Rebecca would always receive special recognition. The impact of that night in Atlanta extended far beyond one family. Word of Elvis's compassionate response to Rebecca's grief spread throughout the music industry and beyond, inspiring other performers to be more attentive to their audiences' needs and more willing to break from scripted performances when human connection demanded it. The Fox Theatre preserved the piano bench where Elvis sat that night, and a small plaque now marks the spot where Rebecca stood to sing with the king. It reads, "On this stage, March 22, 1976, Elvis Presley proved that music's greatest power lies not in entertainment, but in healing." Rebecca Martinez grew up to become a music therapist, dedicating her life to using music to help children process grief and trauma. She credits that night with Elvis as the moment when she discovered her life's calling. "Elvis showed me that music isn't just sound," Rebecca said in an interview years later. "It's connection. It's love made audible. When he invited me on that stage, he wasn't just being kind to a sad little girl. He was teaching everyone in that theater that we all have the power to heal each other if we just pay attention and care enough to act." The silk scarf Elvis gave Rebecca that night became a family treasure, passed down through generations as a symbol of hope and compassion. But more than the physical memento, the Martinez family treasured the memory of the night when the king of rock and roll proved that true royalty lies in how we treat others in their moments of greatest need. When Elvis died in August 1977, Rebecca Martinez, now 9 years old, was one of the thousands who gathered outside Graceland to mourn. She wore his scarf and carried a sign that read, "Thank you for helping me say goodbye to my daddy." The story of Elvis and Rebecca Martinez has been told and retold countless times, becoming one of the most beloved anecdotes in Elvis lore. It's often cited as the perfect example of Elvis's compassion and his understanding that being a performer meant being responsible for the emotional well-being of his audience. Music historians point to that night in Atlanta as representative of Elvis at his finest, not as a performer, but as a human being. It demonstrated his ability to read his audience, to recognize when someone needed more than entertainment, and to respond with genuine love and compassion. The Fox Theatre still hosts an annual benefit concert on March 22nd in honor of that night, raising money for children who have lost parents. The event is called Rebecca's Song, and it continues to help grieving children find healing through music. Today, the story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come not when everything is going perfectly, but when someone notices our pain and chooses to help us carry it. Elvis Presley had performed thousands of concerts, but the night he stopped his show to sing with a crying child became one of his most important performances, not because of the music, but because of the love. Rebecca Martinez, now an adult with children of her own, still keeps that silk scarf in a place of honor in her home. And sometimes when her own children are sad or frightened, she tells them the story of the night when the king of rock and roll taught her that even in our darkest moments, there's always someone who cares enough to help us find our voice again. That March night in Atlanta, Elvis proved that the greatest performances aren't always about hitting the right notes. They're about hitting the right hearts. He showed us that true stardom lies not in being above your audience, but in being willing to come down to their level when they need you most. Rebecca Martinez found healing that night, not just because Elvis was talented, but because he was kind, enough to notice her pain and brave enough to do something about it. If this story moved you, remember that we all have opportunities to be someone's Elvis, to notice when others are hurting, and to offer our own form of comfort and connection. Subscribe to Elvis Presley Legacy Stories to discover more. Moments when the King showed us that the greatest power we possess is the power to heal each other. Share this story because somewhere, someone is crying and needs to be reminded that they matter, that they're seen, and that their pain is worthy of attention and love.